Hey friends, thanks so much for joining me today for a tutorial on how to make sauerkraut, which is incredibly expensive to buy at the store. You're looking at $9–10 a jar versus incredibly cheap, maybe $1 worth of ingredients to make at home. And it is incredibly easy and simple to make because you only need 4 things: salt, cabbage, a bowl to mix in, and a jar to ferment in, and that is it. So let's go ahead and get started with first putting our cabbage in the bowl. Now for years, I took the time to slice up cabbage myself, which you can absolutely do. You want to make sure you slice your cabbage very thin, but I work full time and I'm pregnant with my 5th child, so I don't have time for that. You can also buy pre-sliced cabbage, and a lot of times it'll just say coleslaw mix on it, and if there's a little bit of red cabbage mixed in with the green, or carrots, shredded carrots mixed in with the cabbage as well, that's completely fine. It's not going to mess up your sauerkraut. So take the cabbage that you either sliced or bought pre-sliced. You're going to go ahead and dump it in the bowl. And then you're going to get ready to add your salt. But what I wanted to do first is show everybody just how much cabbage is in the bowl. So this bowl is pretty full. And I want you to keep your eye on this because in just a moment, this is greatly going to reduce in mass. And that's part of how you know that the sauerkraut is ready to go ahead and put in the fermentation jar. So you can use any kind of salt to make sauerkraut, but there is a recommendation to use canning salt over your regular table salt. And the reason is table salt is not actually pure salt. So if you look at the ingredients here, you have salt, but then you also have anti-caking agents as well. And if you get canning salt, you're not going to see that. Canning salt is typically purely salt. And so the difference is that the anti-caking agent has sometimes been known to interfere with the fermentation process. Now, I will tell you, for years, I had no idea. I used the salt with the caking agent in it, and I had no issues whatsoever. But just in case, go ahead if you can and use some pickling salt. Your Himalayan sea salt or other sea salt would work as well. You really just want to make sure it doesn't have that additional anti-caking agent or any other ingredients aside from salt in your salt. So with about this much cabbage, and I just eyeball it, you can do maybe about 3 or 4 tablespoons to start with of salt. And while your sauerkraut by nature is pretty salty, it's not going to make it too terribly salty, and the salt is absolutely necessary for fermentation. All right. So at this point, you can do one of 2 things. You can kind of mix the salt in with your cabbage and let it sit for about an hour and come back, and the salt will have broken down your cabbage. But what I like to do is go ahead and just finish the process by speeding up the salt, breaking down the cell layer of the cabbage and making it ready for fermentation. And you'll do that by just massaging with your clean hands the cabbage and mixing it over and over again. It will possibly make a bit of a mess. You can clean that up later. And it takes maybe about 5 minutes at the most to go ahead and get the cabbage where it needs to be to ferment, and I'll show y'all what that looks like. And you'll know your cabbage is ready to go ahead and put in your fermentation jar, which, to be clear, is just an ordinary jar. I think I'm repurposing an old spaghetti jar. But you'll know it's ready to go ahead and go in the jar when it releases a lot of liquid, when you can squeeze it. So if you look here, I've got a handful of cabbage. That's what you're looking for. So then you're going to go ahead and pack the cabbage in your jar. This little funnel is not necessary, but it was about $3 online, and it really helps to get items in the jar without making too big of a mess. So go ahead and get all your cabbage and then all the liquid released from the cabbage in the jar. And then the next step is going to be to go ahead and push the cabbage down below the level of liquid. And as a reminder, once again, this is all liquid released from the cabbage. You don't add any water or anything like that, but you do want to push the solids down below the liquid. So what you're gonna do is place your jar somewhere on the kitchen counter away from direct sunlight. This is actually a different batch of sauerkraut from about a week ago on day 1, so you can tell the colors are still vibrant. And like I said, different batch, that's why you see carrots and red cabbage in there. 4 days later, the color is muted on the kraut, and you can tell fermentation is working because there are bubbles bubbling in the sauerkraut. And then just remember, once the sauerkraut tastes sour enough for you, you'll want to go ahead and keep it in the refrigerator. It should keep for about 6 weeks in the refrigerator, and that will slow the fermentation process down once it's in the cooler temperature. So that sourness that you have will maintain and it'll stay that same flavor. So go ahead and give it a shot. I hope this video was helpful. We'll continue to put out more sustainable living and fermentation videos in the near future. Thank you so much for your time. Y'all have a great day.